Dive Podcast, straight talk on politics, national security, and America's future. With Robert Johnson and Linda Miller, we cut through the spin, tackle the tough issues, and give you the real story behind today's headlines. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to stay informed.
Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're diving deep into the evolving dynamics of the conflict in Ukraine.
Right.
We're focusing particularly on what looks like a significant shift in U.S. President Trump's approach. And alongside that, Russian President Putin's, well, pretty unwavering stance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And our goal here really is to try and clarify these moving parts, the economic threats being talked about, the military aid situation, and, what might be motivating these leaders.
And the reactions, too.
Exactly. We'll look at this 50-day deadline, what that could actually mean, and the potential ripple effects, like a global trade war, trying to make sense of it all.
Okay, so let's start with U.S. President Trump. There's definitely been a noticeable change recently, in his words, in his actions.
It really has.
He's announced this 50-day deadline for the conflict to wrap up. And if not, he's threatening 100% tariffs on goods from Russia and also its trading partners.
Which is huge. And then there's the military aid component as well.
Yeah, additional aid pledged to Ukraine. But the funding, interestingly, is supposed to come from European allies through NATO.
Right. And, the big question everyone's asking is, what's behind this shift? Why now?
Exactly.
Because initially, U.S. President Trump seemed pretty confident he could get a quick truce, maybe like within 24 hours even, banking on his relationship with Russian President Putin.
That was the initial thinking, yes.
But it seems there's been growing frustration, almost a sense of being personally insulted, that Russian President Putin wasn't really listening to his calls to stop the fighting. And that seems to have really changed his perspective. What's interesting is that it doesn't look like a certain embrace of, traditional alliances or even new sympathy for Ukraine necessarily.
Fear of a reaction.
Yeah, more reaction to feeling sort of personally undermined, which adds a layer of unpredictability maybe.
And there have been some pretty direct conversations coming out, too.
Yes, that phone call.
The July 4th call, right? Where U.S. President Trump reportedly asked President Zelensky, essentially, could Ukraine hit Moscow, hit St. Petersburg, if they got the long-range weapons?
The stated goal being to make Russians hurt.
Yeah.
Push them to negotiate.
And President Zelensky's response was apparently yes, if we had those weapons.
Which leads us to the kind of military support being discussed now. It's quite fascinating.
What are we talking about specifically?
Well, U.S. President Trump has authorized a significant amount of defensive weaponry, again, funded via NATO, up to 17 Patriot missile batteries.
17? That's a lot more than before, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Compare that to just 2 over the last 3 years. And Germany is apparently even thinking about buying 2 Patriot systems from the U.S., just to transfer them to Ukraine.
Wow. Okay.
And Ukraine specifically asked for Tomahawks, missiles with a range of, about 1,600 kilometers?
That's serious range. Hasn't the U.S. been wary about weapons like that hitting Russian territory?
Historically, yes. Very cautious. But those limitations, they seem to be easing somewhat. We've also heard about ACAS-CMS Army tactical missile systems. Shorter range, up to 300 kilometers. But Ukraine has used those already against targets in Russian-occupied areas.
So it seems like U.S. President Trump, even though he says it's not my war, he's definitely putting pressure on multiple fronts, economic and military, to get it finished.
That's right. Now let's pivot to Russian President Putin, because his position, it seems rock solid, unchanged.
Despite the tariff threats.
Despite the threats. He seems set on continuing military actions until Russia achieves its conditions for peace.
And has there been any serious talk about what those conditions actually look like in detail? With the Americans, for instance?
The sense is no, not really. No serious detailed discussions about a settlement. And while Russian President Putin reportedly does value his relationship with U.S. President Trump,
Russian interests come first.
Exactly. Russian interests are paramount. His conditions signal that very clearly. They're not really negotiation starting points. They sound more like terms of victory.
So what are those specific conditions? It's important to understand them.
Okay, the core demands are: NATO has to abandon any eastward expansion. Ukraine needs to adopt a neutral status with limits on its military.
Okay.
There's protection for Russian-speaking populations in Ukraine, and crucially, recognition of Russia's territorial claims Crimea from 2014, and then Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia from 2022.
Which Ukraine flatly rejects.
Completely rejects.
Yeah.
So you see the fundamental deadlock there.
Absolutely. So given that Russia's faced sanctions for years, how seriously are they taking this new threat, these 100% tariffs?
Well, Russian President Putin seems confident the Russian economy can handle it. More restrictions, new tariffs, whatever comes.
The messaging is defiance, then.
Very much so. The stated goals of the military action are framed as being much more important than any potential economic losses. That's the public stance.
But privately?
Officials seem to view the ultimatum with a mix. Maybe some contempt, but also some quiet concern. They know they've faced tens of thousands of restrictions already.
So what's the specific concern then?
It's likely around the secondary sanctions. If they really bite, especially hitting, say, Chinese banks or Indian refineries that help Russia trade, that could impact the money flow financing the military. That's where the worry might lie.
And Russia hasn't been quiet about potential escalation either, have they?
Not at all. They've been very clear. They assert the right to strike military targets in countries that let Ukraine use their weapons against Russia, threatening decisive and symmetrical responses.
We saw that missile test last year, too.
Right. After Ukraine used ATAS-CMS last November, Russian President Putin ordered a test launch of the Oreshnik missile, a new hypersonic system.
And changes to nuclear doctrine.
Yes, they updated it, lowering the threshold for a potential preemptive strike against NATO nuclear powers. U.S., UK, France, specifically in response to strikes on Russia.
Though the White House did try to clarify that U.S. President Trump was just asking a question about hitting Moscow.
They did. And U.S. President Trump himself also publicly warned Ukraine not to attack Moscow. So it's a complex picture.
Okay, let's widen the lens a bit. The economic side of this, these proposed tariffs, the impact could be huge, right? Not just on Russia.
Oh, definitely. These are 100% secondary tariffs, meaning they hit any country that keeps trading with Russia.
So that puts global pressure on, well, everyone, including the expanded BRICS group.
Exactly. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus the newer members. It's a significant bloc. And you're already hearing pushback. Brazil's President Lula saying, the world doesn't need an emperor.
And China suggesting this just speeds up de-dollarization efforts.
That's their take, yes. Moving away from the U.S. dollar in international trade, this kind of unilateral pressure, they argue, only encourages that.
What are economists saying about the potential fallout?
Well, the projections are pretty stark. If these 100% tariffs cover the BRICS nations, you could see China's GDP drop by several points.
At the cost to the U.S.?
Hundreds of billions of dollars during U.S. President Trump's term. That's the estimate. Plus, you'd likely see rising inflation, more supply chain chaos.
It hits home too, right? For consumers.
It could, yeah. Think about specific dependencies. Japan still needs Russian natural gas. The U.S. relies on Russia for things like uranium, palladium, fertilizers. New tariffs there would hit American consumers and industries directly.
So Wall Street's worried.
Concerns about a global recession, definitely. Markets are probably hoping this is, a negotiating tactic and some agreement can be found before things escalate that far.
It really highlights how interconnected everything is. This isn't just U.S.-Russia, it's the whole global economic web.
Precisely. And it's fascinating trying to parse the motivations here. U.S. President Trump says he's on the side of humanity, wants to stop the killing, not pick sides.
And he did publicly warn Ukraine off attacking Moscow.
Right. But you also have different pressures within the U.S., right? Isolationist voices, more traditional Republican factions.
And some interpretations suggest this is more about U.S. President Trump wanting to look strong, avoid feeling humiliated by Russian President Putin, than deep concern for Ukraine itself.
That's certainly one reading of the situation. It seems like a mix of factors are probably at play. Maybe even, domestic political calculations.
Like the 50-day deadline being partly about showing resolve before elections.
That's a plausible interpretation some analysts are putting forward, yes. Meanwhile, Ukraine's perspective is pretty clear.
Peace through strength.
Basically, yeah. Keep the support coming. They'll take weapons, they'll take tariffs, they'll take declarations, because, frankly, what are their alternatives?
It brings us back to a fundamental question, though, doesn't it? Can economic weapons like these actually end a war where military means haven't succeeded?
History suggests it's difficult. Economic blockades rarely force a quick surrender. Sometimes they just create new alliances, new ways to resist.
So the risk is?
The risk, if U.S. President Trump actually implements these tariffs across the board, is triggering the biggest global trade war since maybe the 1930s.
Wow.
And Europe could find itself really squeezed, caught between, U.S. economic power and the pull of Asian markets. It's a precarious spot.
A lot of uncertainty ahead then?
Definitely. A very complex and potentially volatile situation.
Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear. New episodes every day.